Hi, and welcome to Meditation Questions presented by One Mind Dharma. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and Matthew will be answering our questions for today. But before that, you can subscribe to this podcast at oneminddharma.com/ask. You can also email us your questions at questions@oneminddharma.com. And you can also check out our app and listen to this podcast directly on the mobile app. You can find the link for that also at oneminddharma.com/app. So our question today came from Instagram, and someone asked us, what about when you get anxiety during meditation?
So, wow, I like that question because a lot of times people come to meditation practice because of anxiety or stress in daily life or in, whatever's going on, whether it's family or school or work. But the flip side that we often don't talk about is that you picture someone meditating and their eyes are closed and their legs are crossed and they look so peaceful, but there's chaos going on up here.
Yeah.
And it is something that a lot of people face, myself included. So if you're experiencing an overwhelming sense of anxiety when you're meditating, just to know that that doesn't mean something's wrong with you necessarily. It doesn't make you a bad meditator. And perhaps most importantly, you're not alone in that experience. I know that there's a couple things you can really do. One is it something that's bringing you anxiety? And I don't mean an outside stressor. And that's a whole nother thing that may be worth investigating in your life. But for some people, and I think you had this experience, focusing on the breath can really cause some anxiety, because what happens is as we try to let the body breathe naturally, we jump into that trying to control it in a way, or overanalyzing it. And it's hard to just let the body breathe itself when you bring awareness to it. It's like if I say to notice your blinking, suddenly you kind of control your blinking and notice it a little bit. And I'm sorry to do that to you. So maybe see if there's something that you're doing that, not that it's your fault, but if it's focusing on the breath, you get anxiety every time, stop focusing on the breath for now. Sometimes we need to develop the skills and develop the tools and develop the response in order to be able to do a practice. And there's nothing wrong with that. So if you find yourself in a practice that's causing you some anxiety, switch it up. One of the things you can switch to is a metta practice, a practice of self-kindness. And maybe even more on point is a practice of self-compassion, to notice where and how that anxiety comes up. Maybe some of us feel anxiety in the chest or pain or kind of tightness in the stomach. Perhaps we feel it like in the limbs. Wherever it is, and of course the mental quality that goes along with it, the obsessive thinking or racing mind that often happens, to respond with compassion. One of the practices I really love is offered by James Beres, a teacher at Spirit Rock, and it's the practice of simply resting your hand on your heart and using 3 very basic phrases. This is a moment of suffering or a moment of pain, or in this case, a moment of anxiety. Anxiety or pain or suffering happens. It happens to all of us. It's part of life. So recognizing that it's there, recognizing that it happens and we can't necessarily just push it down. And then the last phrase is, may I have compassion, or I care about my anxiety. Just to change our response to it, because so often our response to that anxiety is like, oh no, I'm experiencing anxiety, push it down or get rid of it or focus on something else. And to really meet it and change our response to it can be great, I think. It's been my experience.
So is there any one meditation practice that maybe makes people feel less anxious when they do it versus one that might be more anxiety provoking, especially if you're new to meditation?
Yes, but before I go into that, everybody's different. Sometimes people get triggered or activated with anxiety with practices that someone else may not, and that's okay. Everyone has their own experience.
Right.
I see it most with breath practices, with focusing on the breath, because the breath is so associated with our heart rate and our parasympathetic nervous system, and everything can kind of get activated as we change our breath. As far as a practice that I find most useful, or the one that I work with my students when they're experiencing anxiety, is metta, is that feeling of kindness toward ourselves that we often don't have, and we see it come up in response to anxiety. I am totally guilty of this as much as anyone else, that when I feel an emotion or thought or experience I don't want, my reaction often is to push it down or get rid of it. So metta practice can really help us just meet that with some kindness, or I often use the word gentle friendliness. So to meet all of our experience with just some gentleness, not so reactive. And as we practice this over and over again, we're not focusing on the breath, so that can kind of take that common trigger out. And as we practice it over and over again, when the anxiety does come up, we're kind of able to be a little bit more like, oh, look, like anxiety, or as James Barra says, anxious Buddha. That there's anxiety, just watching it go. And that's something that we can't force ourselves into, but happens with this general repeated cultivation of some kindness.
Great. So if you're having anxiety during meditation, maybe don't start with the breath and practice some kindness towards yourself.
Yep.
Thank you for watching or listening. This has been Meditation Questions presented by One Mind Dharma.
Thank you.